So, hello everyone, good day. This is the group 4. So, bago natin i-present yung ating topic, panoorin muna natin itong dalawang videos. Maganda itong dalawang video na napili namin and make sure na panoorin nyo itong mga ito because it will help in case na magpag-quiz sa atin si Sir about sa topic na ito. Okay?
The sequence begins with the numbers 1, 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, 13, 21, 34, and continues indefinitely. Each number is obtained by adding the last two digits together. If we were to take a perfect or golden rectangle, break it down into smaller squares based on Fibonacci's sequence, and divide each with an arc, the patterns begin to take shape. We begin to see Fibonacci's spiral. The spiral in and of itself is insignificant. Its importance is revealed in where we find it. Take, for example, the sunflower. The display of its florets are in perfect spirals of 55, 34, and 21, the sequence of Fibonacci. The fruitlets of the pineapple create the same spiral based on the sequence. The pine cone does the same. As currents move through the ocean and the tide rolls onto the shore, the waves that bring in the tide curve into a spiral that can be mathematically diagrammed onto a plot at the points 1, 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, 13, 21, 34, and 55. Buds on trees, sand dollars, starfish, petals on flowers, and especially the nautilus shell are formed with this exact same blueprint. With each segment of growth, the nautilus adds to itself one more value on Fibonacci's scale. This blueprint can be seen around us on a small scale every day, but the greatest example of all is directly above our heads. At an average of 100,000 light years across, even the spiral of the galaxies above us are formed with the exact design that the tiny shell is formed. This sequence or blueprint appears to be the trademark of a designer.
Ang galing, no? Well, that's Fibonacci in the nature. So now naman, panoorin natin yung isa pang video about naman siguro sa mas application ng Fibonacci. So, ito na.
I'm sometimes asked, why am I sort of so intrigued with spirals? What is it about spirals? And I think part of the answer is that I just find them beautiful. But I think spirals also make reference to the fact that you can never return to the same place again, that nothing ever does truly repeat. It goes infinitely small and it goes infinitely large. It's endless. And you know, we sort of don't know where we came from and we don't know where we're going, and we're just sort of this, you know, this piece of that larger picture. I'm John Edmark. I'm an artist, designer, and inventor, and I teach at Stanford University. I don't think of myself as a sculptor. Clearly, the works are sculptures of sorts, but in a sense, that's a coincidence. They're just the medium that I'm using to ask and answer questions that I'm interested in. The driving motivation of my work is a search for unusual behaviors, things that are non-intuitive, that maybe seem impossible. Math has a kind of precision and a way of clarifying relationships that allows me to achieve some of these behaviors and patterns that I'm trying to create. I was working with essentially flat puzzles. I noticed that perimeter never changed shape, it just changed in scale as you added or removed pieces. And that then led to the notion of stacking these one on top of the other and rotating them relative to each other to cause these patterns to appear in the form of sort of plateaus that could move up and down the tower. And I'm rotating it each time, I'm rotating it at 137.5 degrees, the golden angle, which is based on the golden ratio. The golden ratio is the ratio where the smaller is to the larger as the larger is to the whole. And it ends up, this is a very powerful generative ratio. Anytime you create a pattern using the golden angle, you're going to end up with spirals appearing, and it's actually been shown mathematically to be the best way to distribute leaves on a stem to minimize overlap. Say a leaf or a petal or a seed gets put out here, the next one will get put out 137 degrees around over here, and the next one then gets put out 137 degrees over here, and around and around and around, placing these and placing these. And when that's done in that fashion, you end up getting these kinds of very evenly distributed seed heads. But the spirals are actually a symptom of this process of placing each bud 137 degrees around from the previous bud. When I was wanting to demonstrate this transforming nature of the towers, I decided to animate them. And when I animated it, I was surprised to discover that not only did it show plateaus appearing and disappearing, but there was this very strong sense of continuity of the plateaus moving down the tower or up the tower. About 5 years later, I suddenly realized, oh, what if I just keep on rotating the entire tower, not just the next level? And in fact, blooms are a direct descendant of a multi-year long sequence of explorations on these golden angle spiral geometry studies. I call them blooms because they tend to have a sense of blossoming, opening, expanding to them as they animate. When a bloom is animating, it's endless. If a plant could grow forever, it would kind of be doing that blooming behavior forever. The first thing I do is I have to create the structure for it, and that is, of course, based on using the golden angle. So I place where the elements are going to be, and then I shape those elements. Depending on what I want the behavior to be, I will then animate them, making them expand, making them rotate. Blooms can be filmed in two ways. You can actually run a strobe that is synchronized to the camera's film rate, or if you set the camera to use a very short shutter speed, it will behave effectively like a strobe. Because the elements of the bloom are essentially frames of an animation, if the frames aren't exactly aligned, you're going to get a non-smooth flow. The kind of distortions and warpings that you see happening are a result of me slightly breaking the rule of rotating by the golden angle. And so they're moving back and forth in terms of hovering around that angle, and that causes them to have this kind of warped, distorted effect. I think my work is most successful when it evokes a sense of wonder, when it sort of seems to be magical. What I'm trying to achieve in my work is something that will evoke that in somebody else, that they'll say, wow, what's going on there? And how is that possible?
And now, we're back sa ating lesson proper, mathematics in the medieval ages. Yun, so parang quick background lang, we will discuss medieval period, medieval mathematics, what is the number system in the medieval period, and why learning numbers was so hard in medieval Europe.
People used the phrase Middle Ages to describe Europe between the fall of Rome in 476 CE and the beginning of the Renaissance in the 14th century. Many scholars call the era the medieval period instead. Middle Ages, they say, incorrectly implies that the period is an insignificant leaf sandwich between two much more important epochs.
The phrase Middle Ages tell us more about the Renaissance that followed it than it does about the era itself. Starting around the 14th century, European thinkers, writers, and artists began to look back and celebrate the art and culture of ancient Greece and Rome. Accordingly, they dismissed the period after the fall of Rome as a middle or even dark age in which no scientific accomplishment had been made, no great art produced, and no great leaders were born. The people of the Middle Ages had squandered the advancement of their predecessors. This argument went and admired themselves instead in what the 18th century and English historian Edward Gibbon called barbarism and religion.
Medieval mathematics. Medieval mathematics was on the whole far removed from anything that we think of as mathematics today. So indeed, to study this period at all, you need to be prepared to enter a world whose preconceptions, political, religious, or mathematical, were very different from our own. There are texts that are recognizably devoted to arithmetic, geometry, or occasionally algebra, but most of the writings that were later described as mathematical were concerned with astrology and astronomy. The distinction between the two was often blurred. Others border on philosophy, natural philosophy, or early sciences, and even theology.
What is the number system in the medieval period? The Hindu-Arabic number system was invented in India around the year 500 AD, and during the early Middle Ages spread throughout the Arabic-speaking world. It reached into Western Europe by the end of the 10th century, and it started getting more use in the 13th century. Most history books gloss over the introduction of numbers, but a recent article explains that the uptake of the new numerals was slow, problematic, and spasmodic.
In his article, Old-Fashioning versus Newfangled, Reading and Writing Numbers to 1,200 to 1,500, math historian John Crossley explains that even by the end of the Middle Ages, many writers had a lot of difficulty understanding how numbers work and preferred using the older system of Roman numerals. When one was using Roman numerals, they would know that the various characters had a fixed amount. If they saw a V, it would be 5, X would be 10, and M that would be mean 1,000. Crossley writes, with minor exceptions, Roman numerals do not change their meaning when they change their place. On the other hand, Hindu-Arabic numerals do change their meaning when they change their place.
A more extreme example is provided by the occurrence of 3 in 1, 234, 537, where it has two different meanings. This illustrates the distinctive feature of the use of Hindu-Arabic in presenting numbers. Their place notation, this independent of the form of numeral 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 9, since on the one hand, other symbol could be used instead of this digit, and the other a different place notation would be used.
This concept of place notation proved to be very difficult for medieval Europeans to understand, especially with how they traditionally calculated sums. Combined with the fact that the symbols for numbers were also brand new for Europeans, it is not surprising that the process of changing over to the new system was slow. Crossley examined 1398 manuscripts created between the years 1200 and 1500 to see how much use of the Hindu-Arabic numerals, and found that throughout this period, Roman numerals were still largely preferred. For the 13th century, only 7% of manuscripts had the new numbers, rising to 17% for the 14th century and 47% for the 15th century. They also found that in many instances where writers were mixing the two systems, sometimes within the same number. For example, one sometimes found M for 1,000 followed by Arabic numerals.
The impetus for changing to the Hindu-Arabic numbers in medieval Europe seems to have come from businessmen. Crossley writes, there was also a clear distinction in the domains in which the two kinds of numerals were used. Roman numerals were used in academia, where universities taught about abstract properties, square numbers, triangular numbers, etc. Hindu-Arabic numerals were used for the practical world of commerce. These occurred in special, so-called abacus schools, where merchants and their employees were taught the new in Hindu-Arabic numerals. Such schools were prevalent in Italy, since they were intimately involved with sometimes quite complicated calculations. The commercial used ultimately led to the development of algebra. It was not until the 16th century that the two domains came together. At that time, academia at last embraced the study of methods of calculation, in particular algebra, while retaining its theoretical concern with abstract properties of numbers.